Fort Wagner did not fall on the 18th of July, 1863. The 54th Massachusetts lost the assault, and that failed attack changed the Civil War argument because it left public evidence that black men had fought under fire. The fort stayed in Confederate hands. The change came afterward, through casualty lists, officers' reports, newspaper readers, recruitment meetings, and a dispute over equal pay. That is the mechanism of this story. A battle can fail tactically and still make an old political claim much harder to defend. A viewer who looks at that map can see why an assault was so dangerous. The battlefield did not offer a simple path to the parapet, it turned every yard of sand into a place exposed to fire. The 54th was already a national question before it reached Morris Island. The Emancipation Proclamation took effect on the 1st of January, 1863. Massachusetts organized the regiment that winter and spring. Its enlisted men were black volunteers from Massachusetts and other states. Its officers were white, including Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. Newspapers, abolitionists, opponents of emancipation, and families watched because black enlistment carried more than a military meaning. Enlistment therefore involved citizenship, wages, authority, and whose sacrifice the country would recognize. Opponents had long claimed that black men would not fight under fire. That claim could survive as an insult because it was vague. Fort Wagner made it testable. A named regiment went to a named place on a known date. Afterward, there were reports, survivors, lists of killed and wounded, and people who could describe what they had seen. The first turn is not that one night erased racism. It did not. The turn is that recruiters and abolitionists now had an event that could be checked against the old prediction. On the 18th of July, the 54th led the assault. Shaw was killed near the works. Men reached the parapet and fought at close range, but Confederate fire broke the advance and the survivors withdrew. The tactical result must stay clear. The fort was not captured. Families waited for news. Officers compiled losses. Survivors carried wounds away from the beach. Treating that outcome as a disguised victory would hide both the strength of the defenses and the cost paid by the men who attacked them. But the field did not fall silent when the firing stopped. Officers' reports described the advance. Civil War newspapers carried accounts to Boston, New York, and other Union cities. A casualty list gave readers names and numbers instead of a distant rumor. For example, a person reading a newspaper in Boston could connect a report from Morris Island to a wider argument about whether more black regiments should be raised. The report did not force every reader to agree, it gave the public a concrete record that the old stereotype had to confront. The next turn concerns money. Black soldiers in the Union Army were initially paid less than white soldiers. Men of the 54th and other black regiments protested that unequal rate. Courage on the battlefield did not automatically produce equal recognition in law. Petitions, public pressure, military policy, and Congress all mattered. In 1864, Congress authorized equal pay for black soldiers. The new law did not return the money or time already withheld. It shows, however, why Fort Wagner belongs beside a pay protest. Military service, public attention, and citizenship were pressing on the same national argument. A date often gets blurred in retellings. Confederate forces abandoned Fort Wagner in September 1863, after later Union operations. That does not mean the 18th of July assault took the fort. Keeping the dates apart protects the story from a false reversal. The 54th lost the fort in July. What changed was the evidence in circulation. Recruiters could name a battle. Abolitionists could answer an insult with a report. Families could read about a regiment rather than being asked to trust a promise with no proof. By the end of the war, roughly 1800 black men had served in the Union Army, and many more served in the Navy. Fort Wagner did not create that number by itself. Federal decisions, local organizers, military need, family ties, and individual choices all shaped enlistment, yet a public example can alter a decision without acting like a magic switch. A recruiting broadside asks someone to act. A newspaper report gives that request a recent example. A casualty list makes the cost visible. Together, those records turned an abstract argument into a question people could search, read, and debate. The sources also do different jobs. A Morris Island map explains the narrow approach. The parapet and ditch explain why the defenders held. A casualty list records loss. A letter or newspaper shows how news traveled. The shore portrait and the 54th memorial show how later memory selected an image of the event. None is enough on its own. A map cannot record grief. A list cannot tell us what every reader believed. A memorial cannot speak for every soldier. When viewers place the records together, the event becomes a chain of action, attention, and policy rather than a single inspirational scene. Here is the midpoint reversal. It is tempting to say the 54th proved something by dying bravely. That sentence is too small. The men were not there to supply an uplifting lesson for an audience. They were volunteers with families, plans, grievances, and political claims. The historical consequence came from the way their conduct was observed and used after the assault. Asking who controlled that meaning is more honest than asking whether the sacrifice was noble. It also explains why unequal pay and recruitment belong in the same episode as the battle. The payoff is precise. Fort Wagner did not change hands on the 18th of July, 1863. The 54th Massachusetts did not win the assault. Yet the failed attack changed the public argument by leaving evidence that black military service could no longer be dismissed as an untested idea. Reports, names, maps, protests, and later enlistment put military performance and citizenship into the same frame. The memorable point is that a defeat can matter without becoming a victory story. It matters when the evidence from that defeat changes what people can plausibly say next. When you see Fort Wagner on a map, keep two questions separate. What happened at the fort that night? A failed assault with terrible losses. What changed after the failure? A public debate gained records, witnesses, and a harder challenge to the claim that black Americans could fight for the Union, but not claim equal standing within it. That distinction is why Fort Wagner still deserves attention. It shows how history can turn on evidence, and why the documents left after a defeat may matter long after the gunfire ends. For more evidence-led stories like this, like the video and subscribe. See you in the next one.